I started doing something ridiculous with my Streamer News live show that I run every other Friday here on the channel, in that I started streaming it in 4K resolution, live. That doesn't seem right. I've been doing it. It's been pretty cool, and we're going to talk about what's required for it, what you need to go into it, and why you might want to do this or might want to shy away from it in today's video. And be sure you go check out the next upcoming episode of Streamer News this Friday, so 2 or 3 days after this is going up, here on YouTube at youtube.com/sheeplessfox. And if you want to learn more about streaming content, I do have an upcoming video about free tools for streamers that not enough people talk about, so go ahead and get subscribed for that because you don't want to miss it. But this video is sponsored by Nvidia. You see, they sent out their new Titan RTX for me to cover a lot of really cool technical nerdy stuff with regards to 4K and 8K video production workflows, and there's a lot of nerdy details for me to cover as well. But I also wanted to test it for streaming, because here at EposFox, we're all about streaming. That's why I have the whole StreamGuides thing. That's what this video is actually part of, is welcome to StreamGuides, your series for everything streaming, right? So yes, as I mentioned, I do a bi-weekly live show where I talk about streaming news, topics, things like that. And originally I started it out with the plan of making it in a 2:1 format, or as some people are calling it, 18:9, as that is the resolution that's most common among mobile devices that are reaching for wider aspect ratios now. And it's kind of a nice compromise between ultra wide and normal 16:9 video, and still gets you, YouTube features and things like that. And I thought it would be a good way to optimize for mobile while still making a good show that everyone can enjoy. However, I keep forgetting, and I want to remind you here, that YouTube doesn't actually support weird aspect ratio live streaming while live. Their new video player, which they introduced only in like 2016, it's been 3 years now, but their new video player supports a wide variety of aspect ratios and formats and things like that, and the player will adjust to the size of the video, which is really freaking cool and makes me really mad when people bake in black bars into the video, because now that I'm on an ultra wide myself, trying to watch those videos means that you get both pillar boxing and letterboxing. Your video doesn't stretch to fill your monitor, you get this like tiny thumbnail view, and it's just a bad result for everybody. I have a couple fairly snarky videos about this subject linked in the video description if you want to learn more about the playlist and why, or the player and why I feel this way and things like that. But again, YouTube only supports this for VODs, and so when I live streamed 2:1 aspect ratio, it baked in the black bars, so people were still getting a 16:9 video with baked in letterboxing. My worst enemy. I've become the villain. However, when the VOD processes after you end your live stream and it processes for the video, it does crop them back off, which is nice, but not what I wanted. And so I decided, since I couldn't do the weird mobile optimized format that I wanted, I just wanted to really try to like push boundaries. Not that this is a new concept or anything, but really take things to the next level. And I just started streaming the show in 4K. For that though, I needed some graphics horsepower. As mentioned, we're using the Nvidia Titan RTX, which has a ridiculous 24 gigabytes of VRAM, a lot of processing power, and kicks some serious butt, and it has Nvidia's new Turing video encoder for NVENC, which I have covered tirelessly on my channel at this point. But if you are unaware, moving from their previous generation of graphics cards to this one, their new GPU video encoder is now 15% for H.264, 15% more bitrate efficient in terms of getting higher quality per your bitrate, and now competes with X.264 medium and slow. And the issue is, even on my insane oven of an Intel Core i9-7980XE 36-thread processor, I'm not streaming 4K with that. I've tried it. I've included it in some of my streaming benchmarks now for my Ryzen coverage. It ain't happening. Barely at very fast would that even be possible. Nevertheless, medium, or slow, or even fast. So the fact that I get to do that with a graphics card, because it's capable, is pretty cool. And the Titan RTX handled all of that streaming and recording without breaking a sweat, and I am impressed. So, why would you want to stream 4K video? Well, there's a few different reasons. One, and I've actually seen this as a use case on Twitch, even where there's lower bitrate, caps that you can stream to, which we'll talk about in a minute, is when you're streaming something that involves a lot of small details or text. And an example of this would be computer programming, coding live streams. If you have a super low res feed and it's already running at a low bitrate and stuff, if you have a low res feed, trying to watch it and read any of the details, they're going to get smudgy and blurry and softer, especially if you're running at a high res screen yourself, and it's not an ideal experience for the viewer. you can stream at 4K for that, get people nice, crisp, sharp text, and give them a lot easier, time reading, especially, even if you have small details, things like that. As mentioned, I have seen 4K coding streams on Twitch, because when you're streaming something that barely moves and is mostly text-based, not complex 3D graphics with particles everywhere and things like that, video games, you can stream desktop stuff at 4K for 6 to 8 megabits per second. It's fine. So I've actually streamed a couple video editing live streams to Twitch at 1440p in the past as well, for that very reason. Another option would, again, be desktop screen capture stuff. If you're streaming, tutorials or some sort of webinar involving desktop interaction, you can do that at 4K as long as, you can handle the processing power, because the bitrate requirements for that are very little. In fact, even at 4K and ultra wide, my full desktop streaming tutorials do not use up a whole lot of bitrate, even for my lossless video recording, because it doesn't need it. It's really nice. One other reason would be if you just want an archive version of the stream to be a higher resolution or higher quality copy. For example, I usually upload all of my videos in 4K and produce 4K content, and so for my live stream show, I would like to have a 4K version of it available for my viewers, just to have it consistent and things like that. If I stream in 4K, then the archive is always there in 4K, and I don't have to upload a separate copy of the VOD, lose all the chat features and the YouTube integrated features, and basically kill my watch time, because no one, very few people are watching VODs in the first place, but those that are, you would want the metadata already associated with the people who watched it live than a new fresh copy where YouTube's just like, wow, very few people cared about that video. And of course, there's everybody's favorite answer, just because. Like I said, I'm just trying to push some boundaries, be on the bleeding edge, or at least the cutting edge, maybe not the bleeding edge, of live streaming tech. The bleeding edge would be the Japanese, I believe it's Tokyo 2020 Olympics that will be streamed in 8K. That's bleeding edge. This is cutting edge. that starts to make the bleed. And I want to do it because I can. I want to see where things are going. I talked about in a recent, or actually, I guess it would be an upcoming video with Wendell from Level 1 Text, that I foresee 1440p and 4K live streaming being something that people start pushing towards in the future, because we're starting to get streaming services that support higher bit rates. While Twitch has stayed limited at 6 or 8, if you fudge it, megabits per second as an upload cap, that may change, and Mixer, at least for people who have transcoding and want to do it, can go up to 10 megabits per second, which is getting a little bit there. Personally, I don't feel like that's enough that's barely enough bitrate to really get a great high quality 1080p live stream. But if people are happy pushing 1080p at only 3.5 to 6 megabits per second, then they're probably going to think 4K is fine at 10 megabits per second. So we're going to see a lot more of this happening, and I'm excited to see what comes of it. Now let's talk about the requirements for 4K live streaming. Obviously, you need a fair bit of bitrate for this, unless you're doing the specific desktop or coding, or barely moving, easy to compress footage like I was talking about, photography editing. If your picture's staying still for the most part, you're probably all right. But for action, for game streaming, which is what this is honestly focused on, or this wasn't even a game stream, this just involved my camera, which has me moving around a lot and showing graphics on stream and things like that, that requires a fair bit of bitrate to actually make work. And that is where you need some pretty beefy internet. Now, I streamed to YouTube because, as mentioned, all the other streaming services have fairly limited bitrate requirements, whereas you can push pretty much any bitrate you want to YouTube, and it will figure it out and transcode it for your viewers, which is one reason I love their live streaming service. But I also stream to YouTube because this is like a main content piece for me, not a side project, and so I wanted it to go directly to my subscribers. If you're streaming to YouTube, like I said, you can feed it anything. I am privileged enough to be able to subscribe to fiber gigabit Ethernet, or internet. I don't know why I said Ethernet, but fiber gigabit internet upload and download simultaneously, symmetrical, whatever the words are, gigabit at my apartment, which means I can do some pretty crazy bit rates. I wouldn't be able to push an actual 1 gigabit per second constantly upstream, but I can push 30, 50, 100 if I wanted. That might get a little questionable, but I set my OBS bitrate to 50 megabits per second and was able to stream that for the whole 1.5 hour show. Now, I actually got some warnings from YouTube suggesting that they recommend closer to 30 megabits per second for 4K, and typically I will say that I find their video bitrate recommendations for actual uploaded videos typically to be almost offensive, because they're pretty ridiculously low for actual uploaded videos to run through their compression. I would never recommend using their recommended bitrates. But for live streaming, the recommendations aren't actually that far off, and 30 megabits per second for YouTube, or for 4K live streaming, is a pretty good way to go. And especially for my kind of format where a lot of it is still images around my webcam and things like that, 30 megabits is what I would target, maybe 25 if you want to kind of push the quality, risk there a little bit. And so that means that you need to have an internet upload speed of at least, I want to say, 40 to 50 megabits per second, because you want enough headroom. You need headroom. I covered this all in my OBS masterclass in the what bitrate should I use episode, but I usually estimate that you should use no more than 75 to 80% of your actual rated upload speed, because you're not always getting that upload speed in the first place. You need headroom for other things that happen on your network. You can never stop all of it. You need that headroom. And you just need headroom for it to slip up a little bit and things like that. It's easier because you can cause problems with your modem or gateway kind of freaking out if you're really pushing 100% of what it's supported on your connection throughout a whole length of time. So 40 to 50 megabit per second should be your upload speed to really be pushing for this. Gigabit is obviously fine. Secondly, you need the horsepower. You need a decent processor and a decent graphics card, and you mainly need the decent graphics card. I've explained this in a few different videos, but the way OBS works to actually build your scene before it compresses it is it renders and composites on the GPU, much like Adobe After Effects or Blender would. It creates and composites your scene, which means your webcam overlay, plus your webcam frame, plus your background, plus your gameplay, plus your alerts and all of that. It has to composite that, much like editing a video, but in real time onto a single layer, and then encode that. And all of that's being done on your graphics card. And so you need enough graphics power to back that up. And I have mentioned in a couple videos that extra graphics power is actually why I recommend a lot of people stream at 720p and set OBS canvas to 720p, because it lightens the load on your system. Well, going higher very much increases the load on your system. Thankfully with the Titan RTX, that is no problem. It has the beefy 3D horsepower to back that up and really handled it without any major issues. But again, keep in mind a 4K canvas is tough. There's a lot to work with here, and I'll have some optimizations we talk about in a second. Now, of course, there is the act of encoding the video as well. Hopefully we'll see with the new Threadripper line of processors coming up, maybe a little bit more closer to actually tangibly being able to encode that footage. But at least on my current X299 system, without some heavy optimizations and manual configurations that I still haven't even had super success with, encoding 4K footage, especially 4K 60 for gameplay streams on the fly, has not been successful so far for me, at least not in the results that I want. Meanwhile, Nvidia's NVENC on the 20 series and up, and even on the 10 series, I will say, although obviously you get the quality downgrade, but in terms of performance, I've been encoding 4K 60 on the fly for all of my videos with NVENC for years and years. GTX 970, I was doing it. 1080, 1080 Ti, 2080, and now the RTX Titan and Quadro RTX 8000s. I've tried everything, and pretty much everything 900 and up for the most part can handle just the raw encoding power of 4K with virtually no issues. I've been doing it for years for my 4K 60 desktop tutorials and webcam captures and things like that, and have never had any issues with NVENC handling 4K. And that is why I've been such a big advocate of NVENC, because it's really been able to let me make my 4K workflow happen. It's awesome. And so obviously the Turing encoder, which is equivalent to X264 medium or fast, or sometimes slow, was able to handle that while also compositing and rendering, and I got a smooth stream. Eventually you might be able to try software encoding, but without really reducing the CPU usage preset to something super fast that will be lower quality, good luck to you. Let's discuss using your graphics and stingers. So typically when you have your video canvas that you're live streaming with, there's a lot of sources that you need to scale. As I mentioned, your webcam, your frame, your graphics, your gameplay, your background video, your window captures, whatever you're bringing in there. If you're setting up a 4K canvas for the first time, you will need to scale all of those appropriately, and perhaps even this is a situation where you will want to play with the different scaling modes. Everyone wants to recommend Lanczos as being the best because it says sharper, but that may not always be the case, especially if you're scaling in even integer values of like 200% or something like that. You'll actually start to notice it here, especially if you need to upscale sources. And this is something I found myself doing. I actually rendered out, I have a couple stinger transitions and graphics and things like that, and I rendered out a couple 4K stinger transitions to swap in for this 4K live stream, and this is where I started to run into problems. And this is not anybody in particular's fault, but there has been some issues with the hardware acceleration for stingers with alpha transparency in OBS Studio. They've been working to resolve this every release, but it has not been fully resolved. And so no matter what file type I used, I ended up kicking up some serious render lag trying to feed a full 4K stinger transition, because that's just a big beefy file, even with Cineform, which it doesn't have the required hardware acceleration to actually decode Cineform in the way that Premiere or Resolve would. I know I recommend the codec a lot, but OBS does not handle it very well. I was getting a lot of render lag. And so what I actually had to do was reduce that, and I went ahead and stuck with 720p. You could do 1080p, probably be fine, but I went with 720p. What you want is you want your graphics or your stingers or whatever to be an even integer scale of whatever your final resolution is. So 4K thankfully evenly scales to both 1080p and 720p, so you can work with either in this case and have a good result. If you're doing 1440p game streaming, you will want to run with 720p for your graphics, because that is an even half of 1440p, whereas 1080p would be uneven. This will give you both the best results for scaling and quality, but also just for performance, because it's a much lighter weight to scale 200% than 175% or something like that, where it has to do a little bit of calculation and adjustment there and interpolation and blah blah blah. There's a lot to it. I recommend sticking to even integer scales, 1/2, 1/4, 1/3, whatever, something that your resolution evenly scales into for working with that. Lastly, with 4K live streaming, you want to consider the viewer experience. Depending on where you're streaming, your viewer may not be able to transcode that footage on the fly, depending on what platform and situation you're using, or if you're using a low latency mode, pushing that much data may mean your viewer doesn't actually get to watch in 4K. You see a lot of devices, especially mobile devices and older laptops, which you think aren't all that common and you don't care about those viewers anyway, but I hear complaints about it every single day. You may want to consider not doing 4K, because those devices can barely play back 1080p 60 at times. I get people who complain that, and I share their sentiment that YouTube needs to make a change for this, is that YouTube doesn't give you the option of playing back only 30 FPS instead of 60 FPS. And there are plenty of people who can play back 1080p 30 FPS videos on their computer due to the way hardware acceleration works just fine, but they don't have hardware acceleration for 1080p 60, and those videos are just choppy and stuttery as can be, and it's not a good viewer experience. Same thing applies to 4K. There is a much significantly lower amount of devices, computers, tablets, mobile devices on the market that have the right playback requirements for a smooth 4K and especially 4K 60 playback experience on a media player site than 1080p or 720p. So depending on where you're at, you may want to consider this. Thankfully, with YouTube streaming specifically, this is not sponsored by YouTube, of course, but with YouTube streaming specifically, you do always get transcoding for your viewers, although that does get more limited if you enable the ultra low latency modes or the low latency modes or whatever. I stick with the normal one, and it's mostly fine, but YouTube's a rarity in that if you stream to Twitch or Mixer or something like that, you're not always guaranteed transcoding, and if you push beyond the supported format in the first place, you may not get transcoding anyway. I know one time, I've pretty much always had transcoding. I am a Twitch affiliate, not a partner, but I have pretty much always had transcoding on my live streams since like spring 2017. And the only times that I know for certain, other than one other instance where I didn't have transcoding, I was pushing 4K just to test it. And they weren't giving me transcoding for it, which suggests to me there was something in, the way that they read support for it and stuff, that they just said, nope, you're outside of our spec, you don't get transcoding, and then your viewers only get access to source quality, which they may not be able to play. Also, if you're adjusting an existing OBS canvas for 4K and haven't done so already, you actually want to resize or change the actual font size of your fonts for text sources, as well as the internal resolution size for browser sources, or they're gonna look a lot more blurry than you're probably used to. I did not for my first stream here, and you can see the chat window is awfully soft and blurry when there's no real reason for it to be, and the text looks a little bit jagged and stuff, and that's because I manually resized the text itself instead of adjusting the text font size. And so the font size will allow it to look bigger while also being cleaner, and same thing with adjusting the internal resolution of browser sources. Same thing with your alerts, although those are usually smaller and less of an issue. So TLDW, 4K 60 streaming or 4K streaming is super accessible thanks to the power of Nvidia graphics cards, especially beefy ones like the Titan RTX, which are really made for that extra high level of video production and content creation workflows. They have a whole new Nvidia Studio program, not like a software program, but like a program of working with companies and stuff. They just announced all of the new Turing optimized AI plugins for live streaming software that I'm super stoked to take a look at very soon, as well as other things. They're really trying to make sure that they provide the best tools for creators. And with the Titan RTX, I can live stream 4K to my heart's content. Hopefully this StreamGuides episode provided you with the tips to optimize your workflow and get a nice 4K streaming going for yourself, or at least help you decide whether that is actually even the right choice for you in the first place. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, subscribe for more tech education. As always, I'm EposVox, here to make tech easier and more fun. Go check us out on Floatplane, where you can get early access to behind-the-scenes content and early access to content and behind-the-scenes content. Yeah. And come check out Streamer News every other Friday here on Livestream at 3 p.m. Eastern. Live streaming show about all the streaming news going on and all the things you need to know about. I already said my name, twitch.tv/EposVox. If you want to follow me somewhere else, I will see you in the next one.